Good afternoon, and welcome to the North Norfolk Festival of Literature and Landscape. We're here this afternoon to hear from Julia Blackburn and Patrick Galbraith. Julia, of course, is an award-winning author with an extraordinary range of output: fiction, non-fiction, poetry, memoir. And she's here today particularly to talk about her new book, Remedies, which is a collection of, I suppose you might call them spells, but certainly
remedies.
Nostrums,
Remedies for conditions mostly non-medical.
And not to be taken too literally.
No.
And she's in conversation with Patrick, who, as I suspect you all know, is a critic, a writer and an environmentalist, whose most recent book, Uncommon Ground, has got everybody talking with some of the very crucial issues which it raises about countryside and land access. Over to you.
Thank you very much. We thought, we decided outside that we would talk about remedies, and then also this brilliant book, Time Song, that I've very much been enjoying, and that is sort of East Anglia focused. Julia, you have written a huge number of books, radio plays, bits of poetry and song. When did it all start? What was your first book?
Well,
outside, Julia was saying she couldn't remember whether it was 99 or 89 when her first book came. So.
Oh, I can't remember even now. I think it was 99. But I came. My father was a writer. My father was a poet. And he always and I was a solitary child, stuck with words in books, because that was what solitary children do. And he said a very memorable thing to me when I was very young. He said, he was also very chaotic, so it was a way of steering through the chaos. But he said, if you can find a metaphor for something, darling, it'll sort out, it'll be all right. And from that sort of time, I think, so when I was 11, I always kept diaries that kept me steady, that made me know what it was that I was thinking. And they went on. And then the first book I did was, I was working for Harper's and Queen doing articles, and the woman, Anne Barr, was the editor, and I'd go off and do a tremendous lot of work on a silly page, which they never published. And at a certain point, she was very grand, and she said, I think, Julia, you must go and write a book. And that was then, I thought, because basically she was saying we don't want you to work for us anymore. Anyway, I went back to this sort of farmhouse where we were living without electricity and without anything, and I thought, what am I going to write a book about? And then I looked through my bookcases and found a book by Edith Sitwell called English Eccentrics, and she mentioned this Charles Waterton, who was an environmentalist, and she said, from far distant times of her living, somebody should write a book about him. So I thought that was another sign. So then I started, and after that, to my great amazement, I was able to make a sort of living, increasingly, and then less so again, on writing. And I just moved from one to the next without really thinking.
Well, I think it's a very good thing that you didn't carry on at Harper's and Queen's, because your books are terrific. This book particularly, which I finished not so long ago, Time Song, is just, really one of the most extraordinary evocations of landscape and place that I've read. And I got to the end of it and thought to myself, I've enjoyed this tremendously, and yet I'm not actually really sure that I know what it's about.
Mm-hmm.
What is Time Song about?
Did I copy out the middle? I had a page. There is a bit. I think it was written around the illness of my then husband, who was approaching death, and it was trying to understand death and life in the best way that I could. And I got this sort of revelation, which is what held the whole book together. It's only a tiny paragraph. It was to do with the sort of the enormity of time. And then I said, I wonder now if it makes more sense to imagine infinity going backwards in time rather than forwards. When you look at it that way, you no longer have the vague dread of what the future holds. Instead, there is the intimation of the enormity of everything that has gone before, a solemn procession of life in all its myriad forms, moving steadily towards this present moment. You can almost hear the songs they are singing. And I think that was the sort of theme song behind it. It was that, never mind about one's own death, or what comes in the future, or the collapse of the world thanks to us, all that kind of thing, that the real eternity is what's come before us. So it was turning things round in some way. And it gave me an excuse to go to all sorts of places and to look at time, whether it's in different sort of contexts, whether it's in cliff edges, or whether it's in fossils, or whether it was going to see the wonderful Tollem Man in Denmark.
Tell us a little bit about Doggerland, because that also, it feels like a search for Doggerland as much as it's a kind of search for peace in the face of death.
Yes.
What is Doggerland?
That was the other reason for writing it. I went to a lecture by somebody called Gaffney, who was rather dry, but never mind. And he put up this word Doggerland. It was the search for Doggerland, or something like that. And it was that a mere 6,000, 7,000 years ago, there was no water separating England from Europe. And also, go back a bit further, the entire landmass of Europe then joins to Sweden, which then Iceland goes across there, so that the water levels that then rose and separated us all weren't there. And with that, he gave this start of this evocation of the past, of how the area particularly between, it was all found out because of fishermen doing trawling, disastrous kind of fishing, but they would trawl up. It started on a place called Dogger Bank. They trawled up a hand axe, but they could see that the hand axe hadn't been brought from somewhere else, it had been made there, so that Dogger Bank had actually been a landmass. And from that he began the theory, and then it got sort of more and more clear, using a lot of stuff brought up by fishermen, that the entire North Sea and all the sea up towards, the north that way, all over the place and over to France, people were walking across it until relatively recently because it was land. And then you had that great the changing of the climate, and then the land was flooded. And I found that so interesting, that the past was contained when you looked out from where I live across the North Sea, that then you're actually looking out over what was a landmass.
And there's something sort of apocalyptic about it. So the idea of the sea rising and killing all of these people, and you write about that in quite a lot of detail, and kind of imagining what that experience would have been like. And I think there's evidence of them building houses on stilts, is that right, to try and escape the rising sea?
Yes.
And are you, in a sense, with this book, grappling with the present as much as you're imagining the past and what might be to come?
Well, only in as much that it's implied, but not. I don't think I do much grappling with it, because I can't grapple with the present. I find it rather difficult. But certainly it's this idea that the past is visible within the present, and that if you go away from just mere centuries and go into millennia and back, you can go further, then it's kind of reassuring that so much has also disappeared as well as appeared. And that's the thought of it, I think. I found it a wonderful book to be able to do.
There's a kind of brilliant dream-like quality about it, and the sense of being in a kind of liminal space. Is it very carefully planned where a book like this is going to go, or are you sort of on a wander in a way?
I think particularly with this one, but actually with everything, I got no idea where I'm going until I got there. So I had no plan for it, except that I thought, now I'll do this bit, or I'd go and visit a place and write about it, and then trust that it would hold together. And then the songs in between sort of held the bits that it has these sort of time songs, which is particularly when something is very complicated, like the movement from the Cairnzoic to all the different stages of the history of the world. If you do it in prose, it becomes hard work, but if you do it as a song, it becomes more approachable, and the same with human development. It seemed easier to do it as a song.
Could you read one of the time songs for us? It's the one that particularly...
Which one was it that you wanted? The one with the...
Well, there were a few that I really liked. There was one about your granddaughters and a sense of the people they are and the people they're becoming that I thought was particularly...
I'll do the bit with the granddaughters, yeah. So this is time song 1. Yes, so that and it will start with the granddaughters. It starts earlier, but My 2 granddaughters are still young. They walk with precarious confidence and babble words that are not yet words. I look at their faces, which hold the secret of who they already are and who they are becoming. I find it strangely reassuring to think, if all goes well, they will be alive for a long time after I am dead. According to a little book I've owned for ages, the Earth was born 4,500 million years ago, at the start of the Cryptozoic Eon. The most ancient rocks can be dated at 3,800 million years, but I have no idea what was happening during the interim. Algal reefs were defining the oceans 2,000 million years ago, and then came green algae and soft-bodied animals. The Paleozoic began with shellfish, 575 million years ago. Vertebrates, plants and amphibia followed until the jump back is 225 million years, and the Mesozoic is beginning. And here are the great reptiles of the Triassic, the Jurassic and the Cretaceous. The Canezoic, and I must look up its meaning, it would be odd if it relates to the man who killed his brother with the jawbone of an ass, started 65 million years ago and encompassed the mammals as the Eocene became the Oligocene and the Miocene and the Pliocene. During the last 2 million years of the Pleistocene, which has been and gone, and the Holocene, where we more or less still are, humans took shape. Homo ergaster, erectus, heidelbergensis, and sapiens, which is us, all balancing that big skull, eyes set forward, dexterous fingers, good at holding tight and making things. It was the thumb. That's what made us into what we are, wasn't it? The thumb and this enormous brain, which made it very hard, as many women know, to give birth to babies. But that, this strange balance. No other creature has such a big head for such a tiny little spindly body. So that was that.
When did time, we were talking outside a little bit about death, and you were saying death sort of is there in so much of what you do as a writer. When did the notion of time start to trouble you intellectually? When did you get hung up on that?
I don't think I'm hung up on it. I think that, well, with this it was the thought is as one sort of hurtles forward and people who start dying because they are of an age to die or because something they hit by a truck, but the two things, then you become aware of that it's only a short time, relatively speaking. But then with that, then there is this tremendous comfort in the past. And I think that I've always rather disliked the Christian idea of this eternity where you go to and you sort of drift about without doing much. But if you look back, then you have that is another sort of eternity. And that I found interesting.
Do you think we obsess over the importance of humans and this idea that we have to prolong our existence? And do you feel some comfort in the idea that there was a time before us and that there will be lots of time after us and we will be forgotten while things continue on?
Yes.
Yes, that's the answer I was looking for. So yes or no? No more complicated than that. Because that's the sense I got from this book,
absolutely.
Really.
We're kind of, I think we're doing having a lot of effect, you might say, in the world, but we will pass, I would think.
Yeah.
And I think that there was a lovely thing that Einstein said. He said, I believe in God, but a God who has no interest in human beings.
Yeah.
And that seemed to me kind of crucial. He thinks that, the whole creation is manifestly something miraculous.
Yeah.
Whether we are so miraculous is more open to question. And he also said a nice thing which I thought of when you said about structure. He said, I think all the time, and sometimes I put it into words. And I think that's very much that if a book is going well, then it's that. Well, you are putting it into words, but you're not. It's the less you're conscious of what you're writing, the more interesting it becomes, I think.
Something that struck me we were talking about the cover. You were saying you don't particularly like this
It's
cover.
American one.
I have to say, I agreed when it arrived. I thought
I wrote and complained to them because it was the paperback and they just whopped it out, and it's the Americans, and my editor had just died and they did it in his absence.
But what I definitely didn't think when this arrived on my doorstep is this book's going to be laugh out loud funny.
Oh.
And yet humour is a big part of your writing, and sometimes at the most extraordinary moments. I mean, there's a bit, and it is funny, when you talk about mixing their ashes of your
Tiny bit.
tiny bit ashes of your husband with some yogurt. What purpose do you think personally humour plays for you in your writing in moments like that? It was very striking, that bit.
Yes. I think probably that there's a fundamental absurdity about many things, and that even in I don't know. I think if you make it not humorous life, it becomes like some sort of opera, grand opera. And I think also, again, I'm back to my childhood, that my parents took it very seriously.
What life?
Well, I came back from school and my father would say, "Your mother has been false to me, darling. Do you know what that means?" And he meant it seriously, but in retrospect, it's complete farce.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of thing, and so that, and I think that it's like the absurdist, isn't it? It's that the humour is what makes things digestible.
Yeah.
I think, possibly.
Appropriately, the grittiness of the
grittiness
ashes you
of the
write
ashes,
about. Yeah.
yes, and it was a nice thing to do.
Yeah.
And actually, this year, it's a long time now. 2013, he died, and I planted a quince tree on his ashes, which did absolutely nothing for ages. But this year, it suddenly said, "I'll show you something," and it's got all these good.
What was it you were saying outside about if a slug eats a lettuce, does it become lettuce or something?
That was my first philosophic work. Before I was writing, I had to do drawings, and that was one of the drawings that I did. If a slug eats a lettuce, does the lettuce become slug? And there was a whole series of questions like that.
One of the things, just with your style, that I wanted to talk about as well, is that you don't seem to have any sense of responsibility to tell your readers, therefore this, or this means that, or how do you kind of figure that in your own work? I mean, often things just appear. So, like that bit, for instance, and there's no explanation. You're struck by something immensely vivid, by an image or something, and then you're just on to the next bit. Is that a conscious thing, or that's just how your mind works when you're writing?
I think it works like that all the time a bit, but I think that if somebody is going with you, if they're following your thought in a book, then they can follow the digressions and the sudden sort of, that reminds me of a joke sort of thing.
Yeah.
And that then means that you're working together with your reader, and that you hope that people follow you, that they stay with you. And I think that the mind does that. It leaps and jumps. And there's a lovely scene in Alice in Wonderland, or Alice in the Looking Glass, where she's sitting on a train with somebody who turns into a sheep halfway through the journey. And she's got a beetle sitting by her ear. And he keeps on saying, "You could make a joke about that, something about horse and these different things." That he has these jokes, the beetle, and it's absurd. But it is that within that, then that makes for, it brings something alive in one's own life, but also I think in writing to the absurdities, or it's a like it's I don't know.
Part of the brilliance of this book is the people you keep on bumping into, just extraordinary people who you meet, and the extraordinary conversations, often quite short snippets that you have. Where do you come across these people, and do you ever find yourself coming across people who you find are actually very boring, so they don't make it into the book? What's the process?
I think I must do, and then they don't make it into the book. It tricky with that one. It involved a lot of sort of solitary walking and talking to people, and trying to sort of pull things. Well, I'd also go with friends doing boat trips, this sort of thing, fishing for fossils with a Dutch fishing vessel, that kind of thing. But it's just, I never use a tape recorder, but I just pick up snippets of what people say, and I find that's interesting. Yes.
Could you read us? There's the bit where you meet the guy called Jonathan with the Clumber Spaniels.
Okay. And then we must talk about this because we've got.
And then we'll move on to talk about that. Yeah.
Because we've got. We've got to, because it's new. Where is Jonathan? Here. Soothsayer child, you say.
That's my note in the margin.
Yes. This was an absolute classic, actually, of walking along at it was Cromer, I think, wasn't it? and meeting this extraordinary guy, Jonathan, who was autistic, but it's very good to be autistic if you're looking for fossils. It really helps. Because you relax, it's that it's something to do with not having any, he just went with the drift of things. And he'd started, his first time, he'd been somewhere on this cliff where they'd been always going after a storm, but he described putting his hand into this coal sort of fissure in the low down, the crag rock, the deeper rock, just out of, it's like sort of a magic moment, and then he felt something which didn't feel like grit and sand, and he pulled out the jaw of a rhinoceros, you know, and then that you can only jaw of a rhinoceros, and at his home he had compass spaniels, and he also had these extraordinary, and his mother who was watching over him all the time, but he just had this sort of natural Geiger counter for finding things, and he had that wonderful statement. Oh, this is me walking along with him along the beach, because we arranged to go looking together. He was the one who found the West Runton mammoth, which he had to give to the museum, which he was rather sorry about. It took us 2 hours to cover maybe 100 yards, and then it was time to go back. As he stood up to leave, Jonathan suddenly said, "I am interested in happiness, and what makes people happy or unhappy." And then he said he thought it didn't matter what you did with your life, just so long as it made you happy. He said he found a single God difficult to imagine, but he liked the idea of God being present in all sorts of aspects of the natural world. When we reached his house, 2 Clumber spaniels in the kitchen gave us a rather vague welcome. We went into the sunroom, in which there was a sofa and an armchair, a table covered in old newspapers, and a view of the back garden. Jonathan brought me a mug of tea and then bustled off to fetch one of the many drawers containing his fossil collection. A chorus of voices. One drawer held the jaw of a wolf, the teeth a milky blue colour, and still energetic in their snap and snarl. He had the most extraordinary collection of things. Anyway, that's Jonathan. And I went to see him a second time. Yes, but a lot of it's to do with meetings with people. Yeah. And people who are interested in fossils are often sort of interestingly off-piste.
And I think you do play so well in a very understated way. And then tell us, so it's 2 weeks now until Remedies comes out.
Is that right?
No, it's out today.
Oh, it's out today.
You told me it was 2 weeks!
I got it wrong. It's out today.
So everybody must buy a copy when you
yes.
when
I
you
don't
leave.
know why I said that. It was 2 weeks ago, clearly.
So tell us about Remedies. This is Remedies for sort of all sorts of things.
It started, one of the reasons it's nice to talk about it here is that this started from when I came to the Wells Festival last, which I think was 4 years ago. I met Daphne Astor, who was one of the founding members, formers, wasn't she? I think she was. She sort of got it going. And we started talking with that way that sometimes with people, you start, she was American, vivid, enthusiastic, sort of electric with enthusiasm. And we started talking and we never really stopped. And she then, I did one book with her, which was called The Wren. And with that she said very nicely, "Yes, I'd like to do a book with you, as long as you could have it ready in 10 weeks. And it was actually such a lovely brief, because then you think, well, I can't let too much thought get in the way, because I've just got to get the thing done. It's only going to be little, after all."
And had you started it?
No.
No.
I just said I'd quite like to do something for this publication, for the Hazel Press. She said, "Fine, do it, but get cracking." And it took away a kind of self-consciousness of it. And then I had got the thought of doing, we had a lot of communication, and lots of that she was just very, very interesting person in many, many ways. Rather similar to Ginny Fines, who's another of these, Jake Fines' mother, who I used to know well, of somebody who sort of shifts things and makes you get excited about life, and in Ginny, well, both of them, life and death, but really that you feel this was it's a very, very fruitful conversation. Anyway, I did the first book, and that was nice, and then she got halfway towards, I think, to asking me to do a second one, And then, in a very, very short period of time, she upped and died. She got ill, and it was most extraordinary, because how somebody can be vivid, and she was younger, 6, 7 years younger than me, I think. So very young.
Child.
A mere child. And then there she was writing, and she wrote from the hospital ward saying, you know, this is me getting ready to say goodbye. And so this was kind of in homage to her, and just a very nice thing to do. And it has one bit that I did go and stay in the house that she had with her husband in, Brancaster. And I went there as a way of sort of saying goodbye to her, and she'd been dead maybe a month or 2 or something. And I said, one of these remedies is in homage to her. If you spend a night in the house of a friend who has died, leave the window open, even in winter, and your friend will appear just for a moment to say goodbye. And it didn't exactly happen, but it almost happened. I remember sleeping in the room, which is the room where she'd slept, and leaving the door open, and somehow this feeling of it was a farewelling. And then the whole bit of this book is a mixture of combining the work of somebody who was called Bald, because they think he probably was, and he functioned probably in the 9th century. And he put together a manuscript called Bald's Leech Book, that a leech book is a medical, medical solutions for problems in a time, the 9th century, the 8th century, the 7th century, when you haven't got a clue what to do about anything. So that it's a very, I find it absolutely...
Where did you come across this guy's work, Bald?
How did it start? I know what it was, is that I'd done a book about a medieval book called Leper's Companions. And in that, it had a bit which came from Bald, of saying, if you want to prepare for childbirth, the first thing you must do is unplait your hair, open all the cupboards and doors in the house, and leave the doors open, and particularly untangle ropes. And then you're ready to have the child, because then it's this mixture of metaphor and image, because there's not much else that's going to help you through. And then from that I started reading Bald's Leech Book, and then rather than you can't just have a leech book with nothing else. So
not commercially.
You need something. So I did it that I mixed my own ones with Bald's ones, and I'll read you a couple of them, which they're so wonderful. To prevent conception, let the woman remove the testicles from a live weasel, causing no damage to the weasel, and let her carry the testicles in her bosom, tied in the skin of a goose, and she will not conceive. And it's the emphaticness of it that I like with them. And there's one for bringing on the menses. Massage is helpful, and so is coitus. And if the woman is without fever, let her eat leeks, onions, pepper, garlic, cinnamon, and scaly fish, and let her drink strong wine. So there's those, and then I added my own ones, which the great secret of it, if secret it is, was not to think too hard, because if I started thinking how to make remedies against things, the thinking got in the way. That's Einstein again. So it was just a nice, relaxed process. So my one against anger, gargle with seawater, as salty as can be. If you swallow any of the water, your anger will return stronger than before.
And are these speculative, or you've tried and tested?
I didn't try any of them. But they're very, yes, there's the one with the friend, if you stay the night. And some of them are very genuine. If you miss your children because they are far away and busy with their own lives, sing the songs you once sang to them, and your children will seem to be close by, even though you cannot see their faces. So that's me. And for joint pain, from Bald, take dove's dung and a goat's turd, dry them thoroughly and rub to dust, mingle with honey and butter, smear the joints with the mixture, and the pain will soon depart. And there's this wonderful bit, they're very keen on grinding up dried turds, but there's one bit where they say, it's probably best if you don't say to your person who you're going to make better, that that's what you put in the mixture, because it might not like it. So I just found them completely delightful, and it's nice to have it.
Do you think it would have been Bald's original? Would he have been coming up with these himself, or would they have been sort of?
No, he was a compiler.
He was just compiling them, yeah.
And it is this thing that, I mean, to make it more serious, that I did quite a lot of work of looking at sort of, because of going to South Africa amongst this very early group of people, the Bushmen, and where you see in sort of modern-ish anthropological films or whatever, that the power of metaphor and incantation can actually cure illness. And there was so there's an interesting connection between the early European Old English stuff, where they've got nothing at all, so that they harness metaphor and the transformative power of metaphor as a way of doing something, and it either works or it doesn't work. And that's I find that very interesting. It says here, the 6th century physician Alexander of Tralles said that his patients, like besieged cities, must be defended by anything that gave them the courage to go on living. He found that images, amulets, and all sorts of strange remedies seemed to help, even though there was no rational reason for this to be so. As a cure for epilepsy, he recommended taking a nail from a wrecked ship, make it into a bracelet and set therein the bone of a stag's heart, taken from its body while alive. Put it on the left arm, and you will be astonished by the result. I find that very reassuring. So it was just a delight to write, and that was what it was. But also sort of serious within the humour.
And how long? The first one was 10 weeks. How did you give yourself? What did you give yourself for this one?
This was more research, and it didn't have that. Daphne wasn't breathing down my neck except as her absent presence, as it were. So I don't know how long it took. Do you know how long it took? It wasn't that long, but I would think a few months putting it together. And I was probably starting something else, my own stuff as well.
Yeah. Is that? I mean, you've done so much, lots of radio plays, lots of fiction, lots of non-fiction. Is there something? What's your sort of white whale? Is there anything that you really desperately want to do creatively that you haven't done yet?
No. I'm doing a collection of little pieces right now, sort of jumping in time, which I think I was saying, sort of, so that they jump from, it'll say 1991, 2024, each one from a different time, and some are the backgrounds of books, and some are just stories of my own life or something. So it's a real kind of, but the nice bit about it is this time jump. And it started with a little poem that I wrote, nonsense poem in a way, which I will now tell you, very short, and it tells you what I was doing. And it goes like this: I've always been a writing woman, using words as best I can, to jump from fire to frying pan, from frying pan to pastures green, with intermezzos in between, while chasing all the thoughts that spin like angels dancing on a pin. So that's the theme of that collection. And the angel on a pin was St. Augustine, who spent an awful lot of time sitting in a cell, probably with dust motes of dust shining, thinking that they were angels and trying to count them and working out how many could be put on a pin. So it has a good solid basis in historic research.
So the theme of this festival is place and landscape and nature. And when you go somewhere and you are writing about it, do you have a kind of set formula of how you capture a real sense of a place, or are you just reacting to what's there?
I never make notes, or tiny notes, if I'm going somewhere that I'm not going to go to again, and it's sort of important. But I always write up at the end of the day, sort of a whoosh of thoughts about it. But I suppose, yes, it depends what the purpose is. And sometimes if it's very brief, like with the book about the Australian Aborigines, of that I finally got into the desert and was there.
Yeah.
And then thought, God, then we're off again tomorrow. How do you? But I think it's very often doing details. I think
which you're very good. I mean, one of the things that strikes me with your work is how good you are at that, and it's amazing because sometimes it's not totally clear why exactly something has been included, and yet it gives you such a clear sense of it, but in quite an abstract way. I mean, you go to the zoo by yourself. I was reading something, you go to the zoo by yourself, and there's this lady who talks about putting a towel down on a table. It's not very clear. It's not clear what. And I was saying outside that I've just started working on a newspaper, and I put things into stories, and my editor says, "What on earth is this about? This adds nothing to the story." And I say to them, "No, this is everything. This is really important. This little."
Yeah.
And you have this great ability of putting quite kind of, left field things in. And I just wondered, why, when you hear things, a remark on the wind when you're somewhere, why do you think, yes, that really must go in?
I think if I'm doing something and I know that I'm doing it for research, I'm catching any straw that I can find just to hold the memory of the place, or to give something that otherwise you might not notice it. But if you go to the zoo and you want, I can't remember what I was going to go and see in the zoo, but there was something.
You were looking at lemurs?
That's right, I was looking at lemurs. And I also went to meet the reptile. I got friendly with the reptile keeper at the Amsterdam Zoo, but who used to let me go into the tortoise compound in the morning. But it's that you've got to get these little hooks. I think it's hooks.
Yeah.
You'll know that you have to have a hook that will then hold a whole lot when you've written it down.
Yeah.
And I think that, for instance, when I went to that desert in Australia, I remember having a notebook that said dead pink parrots' feathers, and sawn off cow horn, and something else, a little list. So I've made little lists of just images, and they hold the story better than they'll bring it all back again, because visual things, I think, are very important.
I went to a pub the other day just to do a little bit of news reporting, and I got talking to a guy in his late 80s, and when I walked out the pub, he looked up and he said, "Well, I'll see you then." And then just as I got to the door, he sort of changed tone and said, "I won't. I'll probably never see you again." And it was the most important.
Wonderful.
And I put this in the news story, and the editor put a red pen through it. I said, "What the fuck? That's the most important part of the whole 2,000 words." I realised.
Did he let it go? Did he let
Oh no, it's got let it get out. And I realised maybe newspaper reporting is not for me at that point. And I was reading, your work as a validation of,
But that's so nice, that story. It's absolutely perfect. Oh no, this is no. I might be dead. You might not come into the public eyes. Yes. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like nothing and everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think with meetings with people who you don't know, that's part of the strangeness of it, that you probably won't ever see them again. That you catch this sort of fleeting thing. Yeah.
How do you? I mean, you've written quite a lot about places abroad, and then lots about the sort of East Anglian landscape. Do you feel when you know a place that when you're writing about it, you get to know it in a much deeper way, or do you think there's a strange sense in which you almost can't really write about a place that you actually exist in? And how does so when you go somewhere else, are you simply a tourist and you'll never really get to the heart of it, or are you able to look at it in the slightly detached way that allows you to get closer to a kind of real truth about it? How does that work for you?
I think it's always that if you have a purpose for being there, whether it's a place you know well, or whether it's a place that you've never been to before, if you think that you want to use it, you can go back in memory and obviously bring things alive that way, but if it's going somewhere, I suppose it's particularly if it's going to be a one-off thing, that you're not going to go there again. I just always am I answering your question? I just always catch tiny details.
Well, it's like a lens. Do you need a sort of lens through which you're looking at a place? Is it what you're...
No, I don't think it's that. I think that the tiny details hold the whole.
Yeah.
And that if you can get those held in...
Like pins.
Yes, I mean, like, you can go for a long walk and it's a sort of one of those ghastly green bags with hanging in a beautiful hawthorn bush.
A dogwood
bag in a bush, flowering with white hawthorns. And you think, that holds the walk. That tells you, it has a kind of image that means that it comes alive and once it's alive in your memory.
Yeah.
And it's to bring back the I think I work always visually.
What's your reason why people hang dog poo bags in trees? I've never met anyone who has an answer for it, and yet there is like this compulsion for people do it and they can't help themselves.
They don't like carrying dog poo. I think it's that they feel halfway towards virtue. But the ones who just drop them, I think it's absolutely drop the bag. I mean, it's hopeless. But I did just recently. I was walking with my son's dog, and who did a pull right at the first 2 seconds of the walk, and then you walk for another hour and a half carrying this thing like a handbag. And it is a bore, but I would never put it in a bush.
Do you want to go to? Should we go to some questions? Does anybody want to ask about remedies or time song or writing about the landscape more generally? Let's.
For want of asking anybody else, I'm Charles Glover, I'm on next actually, but I read your book, Time Song, coming at it from a completely different direction, which is trying to conserve the dog bank in the present time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was drawn, I just think it was one of the most extraordinary books I've ever read, and I absolutely loved it. And I also was sent off on this by Vincent Gaffney.
He was the one who gave that first talk.
Yes.
Yes.
And he is an archaeologist.
We've got a mic. There's a mic that's arrived. So.
Sorry, I'm not very loud.
No, I just wanted to do for everyone. Hi.
Hi.
No, you're very loud.
No, I'm too loud. I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but I just thoroughly enjoyed Time Song, and I also got a huge amount out of Vincent Gaffney, who I then dragged off to do another festival talk, and he said even more extraordinary things. But the insights you gave me and us into this landscape, this Doggerland, when it was actually worked, when it was covered in people, was quite extraordinary. I have read it nowhere else, and I really thank you for that. But I went there. Have you been there? I actually went to Doggerbank. I was very sick, and I went there with an entire boat full of Dutch people.
Yes, yes.
From the Netherlands, because they were the only people who wanted to conserve the Doggerbank for some reason. And we went and looked at what was on the bottom.
Oh, really?
And it was quite extraordinary. And there were, it was coming back because we got it protected, you see.
Yes.
And there were things that...
But how were you looking what was on the bottom? You were
we were
scooping it
looking
up?
at drop cameras.
Oh, really?
We weren't diving. Though I have met divers. I met a man who dived the Doggerbank for cod.
Yes.
This is a mutual special subject. Maybe we should meet in the bar later. But your book was quite marvellous for me. It gave me the fourth dimension of a very two-dimensional journey that I've been on,
Yes,
and
yes.
it was marvellous. Thank you.
There's wonderful those fishermen, because I went on the Dutch boat also from Holland with them, and they were saying that they saw the landscape of the bottom of the sea more vividly than the land landscape, that they got so used to it, so that they would, they know the sort of, because the fish gather in these deep bits, but also the fossils do. There's a kind of fossils all jiggle about until they get to a deep bit, and that's where they went fishing for fossils.
Good heavens.
Have you kept up, Julia, with the ecology of Doggerbank and what sort of state it's in? Is it
Only that it's been protected. Am I right?
Well, we hope so. When I was out there were an awful lot of people building very large wind farms and putting down piles of concrete, 1,000 tons a time, to put one wind turbine up.
Yes.
But it was quite an alarming thing. But there was an awful lot of wildlife there. There were puffins. It's quite extraordinary. That's where they go.
Bank?
Yeah, that's where they go in winter. Puffins go everywhere.
Yes, I did know that.
But there were puffins, and there were
So how much is sticking up above the water?
grey seals. Nothing.
So they're there fishing?
They're catching sand eels, I think.
Yes, yes.
But
it is extraordinarily rich, isn't it? Yes.
In time terms, because I found that I met this, he's a neighbour of mine in Scotland, called Brian. He's a cod fisherman. He said, oh, yeah. I dived the Doggerbank. You what?
Yeah.
I dived the Doggerbank for cod. We found all these fishing vessels which had gone down in about the last decade of the 19th century, first decade of the 20th. And we brought back their ship's bells because their families didn't know where they died.
Wow.
And he found these wrecks that were just bang full of cod.
Yeah.
So, not anymore. They've been taken. So that's, the cod were there until the 70s when he was a young man and dived the Doggerbank. But there's so many of this everything through the filter of your book time song. All this goes on in my head, but it's thanks to you.
Great. Well, I will remember the chord.
At the top
yeah.
left, the back.
I was very interested in what you were saying about the healing power of metaphor. I was just wondering if you could maybe say a bit more about that, and I'm also interested in whether you think that's something maybe we've lost now that we have slightly more scientific remedies for things, or has it just transformed? And yeah, could you tell us a bit more about that?
I think I have an old connection with it that I had from childhood, and then it came back, that I would get urticaria. I'd swell up from fear. It's basically adrenaline, and it was there as a child, and then it came back in a very difficult time in marital breakdown. So then I'd have it again, that thing. And I went to see a man who was a plumber, but he was also a healer. And I went originally because I had a stiff neck. And I walked in and he said, "Oh, you're carrying a lot on your shoulders, aren't you?" And that was the first meeting. And then I went to see him a lot. And he was wonderful because he was non-literary, but very understanding of the sort of creative process of what, he'd always say, don't get in the way, don't let spirit do the work. But he had it of, that in dealing with this urticaria for me, he allowed me to have, I'd sit with my eyes closed and have visual images. And at a certain point, the one that worked is that I would have the fear that was in me. I would see this image of all these little fishes swimming against the tide, swimming against the rush of the river. And then I could just see them sort of holding themselves steady, even though the river was pouring. And then every time after that, when I'd feel this urticaria starting, I would bring in the image of the fish, and I could feel it going down. So that was then a personal experience of it. I can't say I've done it in other things as well, but that then was very strong. So it made complete sense to me. And also reading a lot about so-called primitive societies, what you do if you haven't got medicine. And a lot of it is to make the body work for you, to make a shift. And that, I just find that a very interesting thing. Yes, I could go on, but I won't go on.
At the front.
Thank you. I wondered if we could carry on with that a little bit. I work with a storyteller who talks about the old stories as being medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So back to these ideas of word and literature helping us on really fundamental levels, both with our mental, spiritual and physical health.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered if you could talk to that a little bit, but also for me the book was incredible because it was a way to understand ancient people and archaeology.
This is the time song.
Yeah, through your poems and that prose.
Yeah.
We're going to have to ban people from asking questions about time song. Remedies only.
I won't, but I haven't read it yet. So
it's the same thing. So the question is, what's the question?
I guess across your work, it's about how you feel. Do you feel there's medicine within prose?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I wouldn't call it medicine, but I think there is certainly healing or transformation or things like that within the word. And I mean, I would, you go right back to earliest times of whether it's to and the whole. I wouldn't call myself a Christian, but I think that Jesus Christ was a very good transformer of things, and the word, he would make the word make things happen or make people heal. And there's that extraordinary one which I've always found so moving, is the woman who couldn't stop bleeding, and she thinks that she doesn't need to ask him anything. She touches, I think it's in the book of Thomas, but she touches his hem, and he says, "Who touched me?" And then she says, "I didn't think I needed to trouble you, but I just thought you would heal me." And it's the point about it is that she believed it so much that it was going to do it. And he didn't need to actually notice that. So that kind of thing, I think, is and before we had, I mean, the word, yes, in the beginning was the word. It is a transformative thing, And I think incantation can work incredibly strongly. I don't know.
People like to read Jilly Cooper when they're sad. Somebody was saying to me the other day, and that's, so there is clearly healing power.
She's a healing power, shamanistic, whatever the words. Yes, yes. I mean,
sorry, I was just thinking. You're talking about.
You're talking about Beard and his sort of quite amusing
Bald.
remedies. But I'm sorry, bald.
He had no
He could have had a beard.
There probably was a beard
At
as
the
well.
same time. Anyway, he was talking about his sort of quite obscure remedies for things, but we know placebo works, and so it goes right back to if you believe in it enough,
Absolutely, yes.
and homeopathy and all of that. So the power of your own belief is what does the curing.
Yeah, I think there's a lot, and I think before we had modern medicine, there was we have the opposite now, that you go to hospital and you're so terrified by what happens if you're in there, and nobody says, how are you? That then the body is in panic. Whereas if you have it, that it's working with it, then I do think there's a tremendous lot of and I have no sort of knowledge of it beyond just the logic of it, as it were. But yes.
Probably have time for two more questions, I think.
There's one there.
It's not really a question, it's just a bit of fangirling. About threads.
Yes.
And I've recommended threads to so many people, and I think a lot of us have read Time Song here. But if anybody's, and especially, if you're around here, if you haven't read Threads, and ever since then, I've thought a lot about the interconnectedness in that kind of metaphor of, things spring up and you think there's another thread, and there's another thread, and there's another thread. And I could go on naming threads, but I just think it's a great book. It's my favourite book of any books.
Well, look at that.
There's a lot of books, so that's...
And if people haven't read Threads, just do it. It's lovely.
Do it.
They might have copies of it.
I think I did see some.
Yeah.
Yes, I think I did.
Got copies outside
here. I happen to be a psychiatrist, and your remedies, talking about the power of metaphor, I found it very helpful in explaining to people their diagnosis to use a metaphor. For example, but this is a sort of modern metaphor. People say, why does my memory sometimes work well and sometimes not? Why did I remember that now and not the next 10 minutes? And I say, if you have a torch with a battery that's running down, sometimes you put open the torch and it will light up. 5 minutes later, not a glimmer of light. And that metaphor has certainly been helpful for me, and I think for my patients, in understanding the variability and unpredictability of the memory that might happen in Alzheimer's disease. So it's actually, metaphor is an important tool for 21st century doctors and nurses and health professionals in helping their patients understand. It's not a remedy, but actually if you understand and feel, I know now what's happening, then you're likely to be much less anxious.
Yes, absolutely. It makes complete sense, yes. We got one more?
One more quick one.
One for the road. There was one there, there's one for the road up there.
This is a very quick and a very silly question, but I just wanted to know why you mixed your husband's ashes with yogurt, please.
Well, it wasn't just yogurt to give you your... Was it not?
Honey?
Was it honey and apples or something?
No apples.
No, just honey. Just honey, okay.
I had to make it... I never should have put this in the book, should I? It's really silly to have said it. But it was just the idea. It was a sort of... It was just, otherwise it wouldn't have been very palatable. It was only a little half teaspoon. It was not...
Did you eat it? No.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Why else would you put it in yogurt?
Yeah. I mean, it was just a way of saying it's a metaphor.
It's yeah.
It's a metaphor to say.
It's brilliant in the book. Is that, having read it recently, is that it's both very serious and very earnest and very funny. It's terrific, but it works so well in a book about kind of passing and going from one thing to being another and being connected. I mean, that's where it features. It's about connectedness. I think there's a bit just before it about sex. Very, very good. Really very, very good.
Is it? Oh.
Yeah.
Sorry, the reason I asked was I thought it was going to be a sort of a really good way of growing quince trees that I was going to that you put underneath the roots or something. But
No.
Okay.
No.
Well, thank you very much for all coming along on such a. The weather out there is hard going, but that was a really fascinating and very ranging talk. And do head along and buy a copy of buy all of the books.
Buy all of
Buy
them.
all of them.
Especially Remedies, because they're the most recent.
Yeah,
Are
do.
you signing?
Yes.
Of course.
Yes, of course.